So, hello everybody, and welcome to this week's W Coding, brought to you by W Coding by Code Soul events. We're covering Tailwind today. Woohoo! So, just curious, how many of you guys have actually worked with Tailwind? Anybody? Nobody? How many have heard of Tailwind? Okay, so about half of you or so. So you've heard of Tailwind. What have you heard about it? I'm kind of curious. Because honestly, I didn't start my digging into this until maybe like 2 weeks ago. So I was like, oh yeah, maybe I should do this. I heard about it, but then didn't really start digging into it. And then I was like, oh, it's kind of interesting. So what have you heard about it? For those who have heard about it. Lots of classes? Okay. Ugly ass HTML. Okay. All valid. I actually subtitled this as I hate writing CSS so much I'd write more HTML. So it's kind of okay. It kind of speaks to those problems, but we'll kind of see shortly as to like maybe what it actually does, and maybe we'll form a better, more educated opinion, and maybe we'll end up in the same spot anyways, or maybe not. So, without much further ado, I'm not an expert in Tailwind. Like I said, I didn't hear about it until well, I heard about it before, but I didn't actually start digging into it about 2 weeks ago. But I didn't actually start using it until about yesterday. So, there's some limited experience here, so take what I say as a grain of salt. I think, the session is more for me to kind of introduce to you what I've learned about it, and then maybe we can also go over some questions that you guys might have and some interesting use cases that you guys might be wondering about. So this is not meant to be like a comprehensive covering of Tailwind and what its possibilities are and what its what it can do. It's just kind of a glimpse as to what it can do. Hopefully enough to at least, if you are interested, to get you started using it on your own. I think a lot of us already know each other from previous events, so I'm going to just skip through introductions for this one, and then I think everybody's been here before, so at some point. So TailwindCSS, so this is the logo, a utility-first CSS framework for rapidly building custom user interfaces. Yay. So I think, to start out with, it'd probably be a good idea to actually go to the Tailwind website and see what they have to say about it. So let's do that. So Tailwind itself says, rapidly build modern websites without ever leaving your HTML. That's a little bit exaggerated, but like I said, we'll see shortly what that means. But essentially, it tries to maybe address the problem of having to go back and forth between CSS and HTML all the time. And in addition to that, maybe simplify some of the things that CSS has that make it a little bit more complicated than maybe it should be. For example, like if I want to change a font size and a font color and a font alignment, or let's say I want to change the color of a particular piece of text, I want to change the size of the text, I want to change the alignment of the text, and why are those different prefixes in CSS? Why is it font size but text alignment, but color doesn't have a font or text in front of it, right? And so you're kind of like being tossed around, and really it's kind of memorization as to where do I find this thing I need? Other common complaints on the media query side, I can understand why they decided to maybe put all the CSS directives that are specific to a particular environment, be it mobile or desktop, in separate places. However, during the development cycle, trying to remember like how much you have to change from one to the other, because you're not completely rewriting when you're doing responsive. You're just basically editing what's existing for this other particular environment. So if you do what most people have recommended to do and did mobile first CSS, then as you create responsive CSS for the desktop version instead, you're not rewriting all those directives. You're just taking what you've already written for mobile and then specifying what changes only for the desktop. So you have to kind of know what's already in the mobile. So now you're going back and forth between the mobile and the desktop versions of your CSS. So there's some like inefficiencies like that I think they're trying to address. But anyway, I'm going to go into dark mode here. I don't know, it might be easier for you guys in back to kind of see with that higher contrast. We're going to dive into the docs for the very first kind of tutorial really quick to kind of see what their take is on it. And then we'll start with a layout that I found, show you how I did it with CSS, and then we'll try to recreate it with Tailwind together. But before we get too far in that, let's finish off where we were here. So Tailwind has this thing called utility classes, and you saw it in the previous two statements. And it seems, it's just kind of an emphasis they have. So what is a utility class? And we'll see this as we're doing it, but essentially they've taken all the CSS that's probably 80-90% of the CSS that you're going to use, and they created a single class for it. So every line that you can possibly, every directive, every CSS instruction you can think of, they put a class behind it. Okay, there's pros and cons to that, and we'll see that. But these are what they mean by the utility classes. So they're sacrificing, well, we'll see. They're sacrificing some of complexity for ease of use. And it's a trade-off that maybe makes sense to you or may not make sense to you. So here's an example. So we have this yellow box with black text within it. And the yellow box has a bit of margins, and the text within it is bold, and the box itself has rounded corners. And so what the Tailwind would look like, as you see in the code section after the class, you see some stuff, for lack of better terms, but they actually all mean something. The M4 means something, the P4 means something, the BG Yellow 200, the font bold, the rounded LG. And underneath it, you see the equivalents. And so instead of typing in somewhere in your CSS, or even maybe inline, margin, colon, 1 rem, semicolon, M4 becomes the shorthand version of that. And same thing with the padding, same thing with the background, the font weight, and the rounded. And so between the CSS equivalent and the Tailwind tends to be more concise. And so there will be some things that, are sacrificed. For example, the yellow. I'm not specifying exactly what shade of yellow. I'm just saying yellow. There is a 20, which is a variant of yellow, or 200, which is a variant of yellow, which is kind of a shade. But if you have an exact value that you want, that's not really covered. But again, sacrificing some of that complexity and specificity for efficiency. So if you just want a close enough shade of yellow amongst the variants, and it goes from 100 to 900, and you can use any of the CSS pre-named colors, then it's not too bad. You can actually create custom ones too, but we'll get into that later. But other things like font bold is 700. What about 600? What about 800? And then as you go to 900, you got like extra bold and whatnot. Rounded LG for large, border radius of 0.5 rem, which ends up being 0.5 rem is 2 pixels. No, is that right? No, 8 pixels. It's 4 pixels per rem. So it'd be 2 pixels for this one, right? Anyway, I don't know, because that doesn't sound right for large, because I think rounded itself is 4 pixels, which is 1 rem. So there might be something wrong with the this translation. This is from the Wikipedia. But anyways, so all this stuff up here, each one of these is translated into a single CSS directive, a single CSS command. And so the idea is, instead of, while you're creating this HTML, instead of having to go back to your CSS and type in all of this stuff in the green and the CSS equivalent, I could just keep typing in my HTML code, tagging on classes. Okay, so let's actually start getting into the coding of it itself. So that's the quick intro. And then, oops, go to their docs, which, you know, is not bad in terms of what they've got. I'm going to start with utility first fundamentals. They have an example of this thing called a chit chat notification, and they first show you how it would look, you know, in standard HTML. The only odd thing is that they put the style after they put the component, but just for the sake of argument, let's go with it. And so you have all of these CSS directives that act upon all these HTML entities. Now, the equivalent for that would be this. And so they've taken a lot of the verbiage up top, and because the names in Tailwind are shorter, they made it a little bit more concise than what you had seen before. Is it better? I don't know. It's not an argument I'm going to make. But that's what they're trying to kind of get, and what they're trying to do for developers is that they're trying to make it more concise to speed up the development process. Okay. And so, really quick, P6 is padding on 6. 6 is 1.5 rem. For some reason, for margins and paddings, it's 1 rem per unit of 4. So basically, P6 would be 1.5 rem. So because P4 is 1 rem. Max width of small, and that equates to something. Max margin on the x-axis is automatic. A background is white. Rounded with XL, which I think means 10 pixels or 12 pixels, but I have to go back and check exactly. But you'll notice that there's no numbers. I'm memorizing these things. And so, but I don't know. Maybe, you know, the argument can be made that in CSS there's memorization anyway, so it's not too much more of a leap. But let's see. Keep going. Shadow is a box shadow. I can't really see it on the dark background, but it's a box shadow with a large-ish area for the shadow. Display is flex. Align items is center. And space between on the x-axis is 4 units. The other one, you have shrink for allowing of shrink 0, so I guess no shrinking. Image class, height of 12. And width of 12, so that'd be 3 rems height and 3 rems width for the image. And for classes, text XL, which I believe was 2 rem, 1.5 rem? Might be 1.5 rem. Font of the medium in terms of boldness, I believe, and text black for the color. And text slate 500 also for the color, so using the 500 variant of the slate color for the text. Okay.
Old man in me is like shorter code is not better.
Yeah, and you know that is one of the concerns about it is that one, you're memorizing a lot more now. It's right. And so, yeah, you get there fast, but do you know exactly what it is that this ends up translating to? Maybe it doesn't matter, but I know there are going to be designers who like pixel perfect reproductions of the design that they get.
Mm.
This is not about pixel perfect reproduction. This is just about getting it done, getting it quick, right? And if that, in your pipeline is enough to get into production, why not? However, if during your production you have to get to pixel perfect values, I don't know if this is more work or not, because then there's another step after you get it all kind of in place to go back and fix everything. And you'll see shortly, going back and fixing things can be an interesting experience. All right, well, we'll talk about it as after we try it, because there's a couple things that left me kind of wanting, but at the same time, I can understand the appeal for it. So one of the designs that I kind of looked into, I looked around to see, hey, who has some good website design these days? And some people said Stripe was really nice. Now, Stripe as a website, yeah, it's kind of nice. But what I wanted was something with more like interactiveness, because, just having, well, first of all, let's go to Stripe website. Just having a straight up website might be kind of nice, but I think one thing that really pushes CSS is having a lot of elements that you have to concentrate on in a short area, and a form is a great way to do that. So for this one, I mean, we have huge blocks of stuff, and maybe this is an entire picture. And so when we look at it in terms of entities, there's not a huge amount of entities, and in terms of interactions, they're not really pushing off each other, interacting with each other, except for maybe these three areas here. This is probably just a background picture. You have stuff up here as a nav bar, but they're just spaced out from each other, so not very complex. But I find forms are interesting because the default HTML form kind of sucks, and so you have to at some point address that. And looks like, oh, okay, my computer while recording video is getting kind of shaky. But form is a great way to kind of exercise the CSS to see what you can do. And so we have a lot of elements here. We have an inputs elements, we have labels, we have standard text, we have buttons, we have a checkbox, we have this little badge thing down here, some more buttons with emoticons in it, yay. Different colors, links, and so there's a lot going on. And so I think, in terms of a playground to play with CSS, it's kind of a rich playground. So my proposal is to recreate this. Now, we can do this with VS Code, but I thought a new thing to try this week is Replit. One of the advantages of using a Replit is that if you guys get lost, the code is already there, so you can copy paste back in. In addition, I think that was the main thing. I mean, it's an editor, so we got everything that VS Code does. One of the big benefits is that because it's online and distributed, you guys can all see it. And if you need to catch up, you can copy paste to catch up. Yeah, what is all that? So, so this link I'm going to put up in the Discord channel. And when you guys get to it, yours is going to be a little bit different. Yours is going to look like this when you're not logged in. But what you can do instead, I encourage all of you guys to sign up if you haven't already. You can use your Google account or any other federated account to sign up. But create a Replit account and then fork the REPL. Or you can follow along and just type as well. Kind of your choice. Okay. So again, I'm going to put this in the Discord channel. Okay, so after you forked my my replet, you should have something that looks like this. Your colors might be a little different. I just turned on dark mode on mine, and I will also try to zoom in so you guys in the back can see. All right. So what you have is your standard, editor kind of layout where on the left side you have all your files and your navigation. You can always hide them by just having the little caret on the left side. You can hide or unhide the entire column by clicking on the icon in the way upper left. And so that'll get rid of that entire column if you want to hide that entire column. Underneath that, you have tools. We're not going to be using these too much. The only one that, of particular interest is if you accidentally close the web view, then you can always recall the web view from your tools. Okay. And then there's other things in there. We're not really going to be using too many of them. I guess some of you can chat me, but no one's online, so I'm not sure that's going to make sense. Other than that, once you start clicking on files, you start creating tabs up top. I have a lot of tabs open, so I'll just close them all for now, so they all kind of start out in the same place. And then you have this big orange run button, or whatever color it might be green on yours. A button on top for run, and basically run will take it and we'll try to run what you got. And so what I have here so far, at least, so you can kind of get an idea of the files I have here. I have the index, which is what we're starting with. Now, replet only allows you to, when you hit run, it only allows you to run the index HTML. So if you want to run other HTML, you have to link to the other HTML. I don't know if this is just because it's a limitation because it's a free version, or what exactly makes this only run the index HTML. But for example, if I can't go into one of the other HTMLs, click on it, and then click run, because all it's going to do is go back to the index HTML and run only the index HTML. Okay, so that's kind of weird thing that we gotta work around. But it's okay because I put the bare HTML in the index HTML that we're going to build upon anyway, so that it's convenient for us to hit run and keep going. But for sake of looking at what we have, so we have the vanilla HTML version, which we don't have to click on because this is the vanilla HTML version. But if you ever want to go back to it, the link is down there for another version that I saved. The vanilla CSS version. And the vanilla CSS version is me interpreting that stuff into standard CSS. And then, I don't know how to go back. This way? No, it's going to take the whole browser back. Yeah, I mean, this obviously that's the most obvious way, but maybe refresh. But there's no real back. Anyways, and then I did already do a Tailwind version, and so if you want to look at a Tailwind version, you can as well. But we're also doing a Tailwind version together. But if you get behind, you can always go back to the link I sent you to see my current version and see what the code is, I believe. You just can't edit it, I believe is the way it works. And then, or you can just refork. So you have a couple options in trying to catch up if you get too far behind. Okay. So let's look at the sorry, keep going to the file. So that's the index.html. Script.js I'm not using because we're not really adding too much JavaScript in this one. I do add a font file, which I actually took off of the actual Stripe website. So not licensed, but free use for education. So don't use this on your production website. But anyways, that's a disclaimer. We have login bear, which is exactly the same as the HTML is now, except for those 3 links in the bottom. And then, let me verify that actually. Yeah, so without the 3 links in the bottom, just a bare HTML, no CSS whatsoever. And And then we also have stripe login, which is the version with regular HTML, with regular CSS, which I stripped out and just put into a .css file. I could have just put it in there. Maybe it would have been better as a direct comparison, but we won't do that now. And then the CSS file itself. The CSS file itself, just real quick to go through, we have introduce a new font. I did reduce the rem font size to 14. Typically, it starts at what? Anybody know? What's the default font size? 16. So all my rems are going to shrink a little bit. All right. I did that on purpose because I found myself while I was doing the CSS constantly doing point non-rem to make it look right. I was like, forget it. Just at that point, you might as well just shrink the font size and have everything be one rem instead. And then I was able to get rid of a lot of rems, a lot of small adjustments, 0.09 adjustments. Anyways, the body itself, just trying to get a full size with a sans serif font. Ubuntu I like because it's nice and thin compared to the standard Arial or sans serif. But that's all that is. I removed the underlines and all the extra formatting on the links. Background. Here, let's go to the CSS version so actually put some of this into perspective. The background is this diagonal thing that goes across here. So it's a little bit gray on top with 2 blue stripes and a 3rd cyan stripe. And so there's that. And so those are just to make those entities into a design elements. Display area is that center area where that contains the logo, the input box, and the post dialog text, as well as the footer. And everything inside there, the top is the stripe part. The dialog is the dialog box part, so it's kind of self-describing. Dialog title is signed into your account. That's the only place that shown was used. So, not really, I guess, required, but I wanted to see if how Tailwind would suck in other fonts, so I left it in. Text inputs, just reformatted the way the text input looks by making it a little bit larger, changing the outline, putting rounded on it, putting the labels just before it. Down here on the checkbox, I made the checkbox itself have the same color as the kind of theme color for it. That was for accent color. Obviously, the buttons is styled. And other than that, on the bottom, this little badge was created with their own. I took the SVG from them. I'm sure they got it from some other font set. I also took the Stripe logo from them. And that's also an SVG. But other than that, these are just emojis, so that's just straight up text. But I did have to style the buttons. And the bottom, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a unordered list, and then turn it into a flat thing with dots between them, instead of using the standard div layout. So to see how we work with base elements. And we'll talk a little bit about the difference between those as we get into it in Tailwind. But anyways, that's kind of the layout. So, so this with CSS turns into that. Right? Okay. So, how do we do that in Tailwind? Now, I will say that because I created the CSS version first, it was a little bit more straightforward for me, because essentially I was just doing translation from the CSS into the Tailwind. But it gave me a kind of an idea as to maybe how this Tailwind stuff gets put together. And so it still worked out pretty well for me in terms of, I think, I didn't lose too much if anything, in terms of my education and learning Tailwind in that way. So it could be a viable way for you guys to also kind of ease yourself into Tailwind if you need to. Anyway, before we get started, any questions so far about our existing layout? No? Okay. So to start out with, there's a couple of ways to actually include Tailwind into your project. And it's listed in installation. We can do it as a CLI, which basically gets added to whatever development process you have. Because Tailwind itself also contains, in addition to its processing of your CSS, it contains scripts that will essentially look through your code to see what CSS you use and then add that into the CSS that it generates to see what classes you use, and then it generates the CSS for those classes. It used to be early versions of Tailwind did the other way around, where it contained a huge library of all the possibilities. And then as part of the deployment process, it did tree shaking, so it just went in and deleted all the ones that you didn't use. The con for that is because it was doing a lot of deleting for the most part, it took a little longer. So performance, there was a bit of delay in terms of deployment. So the newer versions do it the way that I described it first. It actually detects when you start using the classes, and then it'll start injecting as you use classes. And so it addresses that performance gap. But anyways, it uses something called post CSS, if you guys have heard or used it before. It's not the only place that's been used here, but it does use post CSS to do that. If you want to use the Node version, you can. I'm actually just going to use the CDN version because I don't want to deal with the build process in addition to everything else that we're doing today. I just want to learn Tailwind for Tailwind. And then if I like it and I want to use it, then I'll look into how it gets fit into the build process. So I'm going to ignore the build process for now. I'm just going to use the CDN version.
Does anyone not know what CDN is? CDN is Content Delivery Network. It's when people host files online in a distributed manner. So we'll have servers in Seoul, Tokyo, Hong Kong, London, Paris, right? Distributed everywhere so that you can get the closest copy quickly and easily. And you don't have to install it on your own server. You can just pull it from the public server. So someone else is paying for hosting on that one.
Yeah. You're just basically downloading a script. Mm-hmm. And it just happens to be close to you all the time. Anyways, so in the CDN version, it's easy to include into the HTMLs. Essentially, we just need to copy this line out and paste it into our code. So right after the title, I'm going to paste it in. Doesn't really matter where in the head it goes. You can even put it in the body if you wanted to, but by convention, this is the best place to put it. We could normally put scripts at the end of the body, or we can defer at the top. What a lot of people do with scripts. So you don't want to do it with this one because this one affects your layout. So you're going to have jittery layout if you have, the garbage. Well, not say garbage, the non-CSS version of everything, and then all of a sudden the JavaScript kicks in and then goes back and styles your page. You don't want that jitteriness probably. So this makes sense to put at the top of your script. But saying that, this is not something you would do in production anyways. You'd probably put it as part of your process, deployment process on the back end. And so it'll be compiled in essence. So you really wouldn't use a CDN or this way of doing it in production anyways. Cool so far? All right, so let's start using it. So one thing that we can do is to make it kind of more concrete. What I'm going to be doing is essentially going through the CSS that already exists, and I'm going to be doing a lot of translations. Now, I'm going to keep it open on this screen so you guys don't have to actually look at to see what the actual directives are. But essentially, that's what I'm going to end up doing. So for the background, for example, Oh, I have a background pink in there. That's not necessary. That was just there for me to debug it, but maybe that's a great time to start using it. And so for the background, I'm going to translate all these into Tailwind, and we'll see how it shakes out. Let's start with the body. Yeah. So let's leave that in. Start with the body. Class. We're going to add a class to the body, even though it didn't already have one. I think for now, just to kind of, confirm everything is working okay, we're going to set the background to pink. Ooh. Yay. Yeah, nothing. Well, I got nothing too. But I know that the Tailwind is working because there have been actual changes in my stuff. The fonts have changed. My links are no longer blue. Yeah, so that's probably the most noticeable. There's other like small differences in here, but it is different. Essentially, what I've forgotten is to give it a variant. So yeah, 400, 500, whatever you want to put it. So there we have our pink now. So we know it's there, it's responding, it's working. Okay. So, but PG Pink is not exactly what I wanted in my body class. Essentially what I want in my body class is I wanted 0 margins, which I don't think is actually necessary because I think Tailwind does it for you. Anyways, because if you notice in this box here, there is no more margin, no more default margin like there was before. So that's probably an option. I'm going to leave that out then. We're going to say horizontal. We're going to be doing screen, which means that it's 100 BH for the viewport. We're going to be doing display flex. We're going to justify center to center all the content in our body. And the default text color is going to be slate with the variant of 700, which is a little bit of a dark. So typically the 100s are really light and the 900 is really dark. And then so you can kind of gauge in the middle where you want to be. So it's a little bit on the darker side, but not absolute dark. Okay. So save that. You can do Control S, maybe even Command S on yours. I think it might actually. Yeah. Don't see too much of a difference, but maybe if I pull out, no, because it's still width of 100. So we'll keep going. Next one is the background. The background on this one, because we want to put something behind all the text, behind the form, we're going to use absolute positioning. Right, because we use positioning whether it's a relative position or an absolute position, even a fixed position, as long as it's not, well, we can then use Z indexes to push things forward or backwards in the layout. So we're going to use absolute positioning for this one. This one's going to have a top of 33% or 1/3, but it's actually negative top. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a gray top, and then I'm going to put a skew on it. And if I put a skew on it, without adjusting the top, there's going to be a little bit of white on top. Because basically you've taken something and you've kind of rotated it. And so I'm going to put a negative top of 33% to cover that top part that would otherwise have shown colors. For bottom, I'm going to have it the other 66%, or 2/3. Left, I'm going to say is 0. I'm going to say right is also 0. And let's see, the Z index is a negative 10, so I'm going to push it backwards. And the skew is going to be a negative 12 degrees on the y-axis. Okay. We're not going to see anything yet because I haven't added any background colors, so everything's still transparent. But in the next one, for the background gray, going to say h full means 100% height. Negative margin bottom of 10, which is about 40 pixels, because these are in rems, and the rems gets converted into pixels in 1x4 basis. So it's a unit. It's not even rems, it's units. 10 units is 4 rems. No, 10 units is 40 pixels. Background slate. So this is where I actually add the color to the background, and it's going to be 50 on this one. So it's even lighter than 100. It's a super light version. At this point, we should be able to see a little bit of something. Now that we added a little bit of color.
Barely.
Just barely kind of see. Yeah, you can change the number to a little bit, something a little bit darker. Yeah. So here it is at 500. So you can see that a lot more clearly. Okay. So now we get to the 2 bars that appear in the background. The 2 bars that appear in the background, I use a common class for the both of them. And so we come upon our first, what do you call it? Our first customization, or at least the reuse of code. I'll show you where I got the code to do this, and we'll go through it together. And so back in the installation directions for the CD, and after you do the copying, it tells you how to do customization of custom colors, which we will also do for this one. But it also says if you ever want to do custom CSS and you add in your own CSS, you can add it in this way as well. I notice, however, I'm not sure what this LG means. It must be for another framework. I'm not sure which framework, but I never got to work with LG. I left it off and it worked fine. So I'm not sure what that LG means, so ignore that LG in this example. But you're absolutely right. It's for responsive designs. So for screens large and above, it's content auto. But anyways, the things to concentrate on is that there's this new thing called layer or and layer, and there's actually a word called utilities, which is a reserved word. There's 3 different kinds of things you can configure. There is base, which it's what Tailwind considers basically on the tag level. There's components, which is custom components that you've built, so custom classes in other words, and then utilities. And the difference between components and utilities is that utilities you might use throughout your website instead of just on one page. It's not strict, though. You can kind of put anything anywhere, I noticed. So it's up to you to kind of keep this organized. But if we were using the node-based deployment system, then we would have a separate config file, TailwindCSS config.js, and include this on top of it. But since we're working on the CDN version, or just downloading the script version, we can just specify the layer base component or utilities that we want to customize, and then specify the things that we want to customize under there. Okay. So back in our code again, that means that I'm going to create a style section. But before I close it off, I need to give it a specific type, so that Tailwind knows that this is something that it needs to process. And the type is text and Tailwind CSS. And now you can close out the style. Okay. And within here, essentially what I'm going to be doing right now is creating reusable component for background blue, since I have 2 blue bars that share a class. And so that's just on the component level. And so I'm going to say layer and then component. plural components, and then in there I'm going to do the first customization for background blue. So this is a class called background blue. So far, just like regular CSS. Okay. Now at this point, I can just type in the standard CSS. I can take in the CSS that I had in my other file, and I can just paste it into here. We're good to go. Or there's another keyword called apply, where I can keep doing Tailwind inside the CSS section. Yeah. So in here, I'm going to do relative. Because I want to be able to use the positioning of top, bottom, left, and right. The height, I'm going to be to 10 units, so 40 pixels. Width, I'm going to say for now just a third of the screen, or 33%. And I want it to be background, let's just say for now, blue of 100. Okay. So that's now set. Now, yeah, no, yes, semicolon. It's kind of optional. It'll appear anyways, but it's CSS. So, but semicolons are good to remember to keep using. So you could actually keep adding stuff to it, and then the semicolons become more important. But at this point, I'm going to go down here and to my div, so I know both of these are now applied. And so for the background blue right, I'm going to continue with Tailwind instead of having that special class. I'm going to include some more Tailwind in there, and essentially I'm going to do for this one float right. For that one, for the first one, and then the second one, exactly as you might have already guessed, float left. Now I don't want them on the same line, so I'm going to also do a clear both. So they're on separate lines because they are staggered in the original design, and so staggered kind of like that. Now the blue is a little bit different than the blue that we want, right? It's like a purpley blue, yeah. And so I went in, already looked at the CSS that they use and found the color that they have. And so we're going to be customizing or adding a custom color so that it's not just blue, right? Where I just say it's BG blue. I'm going to have a custom kind of blue. And to do that, I'm going to go back to here and to the section where they show you how to add custom colors or custom configuration. And for now, I'm just going to copy that entire thing and paste it into my code as well. There, right under my script, and another section. Now, they added something called Clifford, which isn't this color that I want. I'm just going to call it striped blue. And I'm actually going to have two colors because in the original forum website there is this cyanish blue thing, and then there's this blue. I'm going to ignore the dark blue. The dark blue is actually another element that they created, but this is getting just too out of hand of trying to create it exactly, so I just ignored it. So I just have 3 boxes instead of this actual 4th box that we have to somehow try to figure out in there and then try to align it precisely. So I'm going to just have two levels, I guess, of blue. And so in order to get multiple levels of a color, you just start another section, which is basically starting another object. And the object itself has a key. This one, I'm not sure if I have to make this a string, but maybe not. We'll see. The color itself, the values are 7A, 73 FF. And then while I'm here, I'll create another darker version for the darker version of the blue. And that one was 63 5B FF. 63 5B FF.
What if you just wanted to overwrite the color, like make it sort of BGQ or just your custom color choice?
I think you can just do it in here too.
Would it be the same thing? You would just say color is used all blue.
I don't know. Let's find out. It's easy enough, right? I just delete the stripe. Yeah. But I'm going to put the stripe back in. Because it'll be more clear, I think, for people in the future to look at this, what BG blue actually is a custom blue, overridden blue.
It'd be nice to like establish your own palettes or something. Just kind of the same.
Yeah.
Wait, where did the BG come from? Oh,
Background?
Jesus, okay.
Okay, so we got custom colors and we have custom CSS to keep using the idea of the class of having reusable classes. Now background light blue is a one-off, so this one's going to be kind of more involved. So the background, or the last one on the bottom, I did a clear both. It's a relative, because it does need to do a little bit of overlap, so I need to be able to control the z-index on this one as well. That little light blue thing has a little bit of an overlap. The width on this one, so if you want to do custom values, one that doesn't precisely fit into, W1 or W10, right? Because they're all multiples of 4. If you have something that's not a multiple of 4, you can actually force a value in with a square brackets. So for example, here I want to force a value in of 150 pixels, which is not a multiple of 4 that I know of. And then height is a multiple of 4, so I can keep that. Height is 40, so it's H10. And it's not only these number values. Actually, you can do things like the background color. And this one, I decided instead of going up there, well, you could, but you can also just type it into here. So I guess the color is actually a little bit different than what I had up there. 80 E9 FF. Is it the same or is it different? Oh, that's different. Okay. Correct. And then the bottom, I also have a custom value that is not multiple of 4, so that's 70 pixels. Opacity is 75%. Left. The left value, I'm including a calculation. So it's calc 30% minus 300 pixels. Now, note that there's no spaces in between the minuses. I know some people like to put spaces here for CSS. The documentation says if you want to include spaces, you're going to have to turn them into underscores because the spaces will have a special meaning within the string itself. Or just leave them out. Okay, and with that, we should have a little bit of a light blue here. If I extend this, you should be able to see it a little bit better. Okay, so we got the background. I'm going to take that slate blue and bring it back to 50 to make it more or less actually there. Okay. So far so good? Let's keep going. The display area. The display area is that central area that has the the logo, the dialog box, and all the text underneath it. And so for this one, I said that I set a maximum width because on the original one, it doesn't grow obviously all the way to the corners or the edges of the screen. It's actually confined within a very specific size. And so the max width on this one I said was XL, which I believe is 560 or something like that. This might be a good time to kind of show you how I came up with these things and what the process I went through to look up the stuff. And so when I said I wanted a max width, essentially what I would be doing is going to the Tailwind website, and they have a lot of the stuff on the left side here. And you can either scroll down and look for what you want, or you can faster just search. So for width, there's width. And under the width, it gives you all the conversions as to what you can expect. Right? And so these numbered things like W4 is actually 1 rem. So it's 4 units per rem, but it's 4 pixels per unit. Or another way to think of it is the rem cycles, right? It's 1 rem, so it's 16. But you don't actually do 1, you do 4. It's their own math. So it's not the one that you're used to, the rems, or the pixels. It's a brand new unit divided by 4. So it's, I don't know. Anyway. But one thing that they have is max width as well. And so max width was what I was using. And they have predefined sizes for this different screen sizes, for responsive screen sizes. And large, in this case, is at 512, and XL is at 576. And I put mine at XL. So the largest of this display area will be 576. I think in the original one on Stripe it's 540, but 576 was close enough. We don't need to do pixel perfect in our ones, nor do we want to, because it'll take much longer. So max WXL to get that max kind of area in the center. Then after that, we do a min height of full to make sure that we always get, if we have a huge screen, there's going to be padding, or not, there's going to be these little stripes along the side. You can barely see them. There's a dotted stripe here. I want that to be always to the bottom of the screen. And so I set the height to full to make sure, so I can put a border on it and it'll always go to the bottom of the screen. Otherwise, these dotted lines, if this form is smaller than the screen, would stop at the end of the content. So I'm going to force that display area to go to the bottom of the screen so that I can have a border on it that goes all the way to the bottom. So let's do that. So border, I'm going to have a border on the left side, and I'm going to have a border on the right side. And then the border, the type I'm going to be using is a dashed border. And the border color I'm going to be using is gray with the sub variant of a 100, so kind of a light gray. I do have a little bit of margin on the x-axis with 1 rem or 16 pixels. And leave it at that for now. Okay. So that should produce at least a centered area. You see, you can barely see it, but there's little dotted stripes on each side. Okay. And of course, a little margin, the 16 pixel or 1 rem or 4 unit margin. So the next one, the top. The top is where the logo is and all that. And for the top, I'm going to be doing a padding of 6 all around. 24 pixels all around. The fill is for the SVG, because the SVG, I don't want stripe to be black. I want it to be a really dark shade of gray like it is in their website. So I chose gray 600. Now, one thing I will note from those of you who like to spell gray with an E, I found that
It works. It works in many ways.
it doesn't work in Tailwind.
No.
Asshole.
So,
Americans.
yes, it's made by Americans. Yeah.
No.
And I like gray with an E, but it's gray with an A in Tailwind.
Is that the American?
Okay. So let's keep going. So that is the logo. And so we got nice air spacing around the logo itself. Now let's get to the dialog box, which is the input itself. The input itself, I noticed that there was a little bit, the dialog box that extended past the borders of the dotted lines. And so I just added a negative margin on that one. The negative margin I added on that was just a 1 pixel margin, or just px. You don't have to do px1, it's just px. Padding of 5 units or 20 pixels, or 1.25 rem. If you guys want to do it in rems. The dialog box is going to be display flex, so that I can do some stuff with it. So now I look at it, I'm not really doing much with it. But anyways, force it into flex call to force it into column mode. This box is going to be rounded with medium, so 6 pixels for the round value. This one also needs to have a shadow box, or box shadow. And we want to extend it pretty far, so that's the XL. I think it's 12 pixels for the XL.
Rounded is border radius?
Rounded is border radius, yes. And then the background I'm going to set to white, so that I don't have the background bleeding through of these like skewed boxes in the back that actually sticks out from there. And it's also good for the shadow, if it has something for the shadow to contrast against. And then with that, we should get, okay, so we got the white. Okay, can't really see much of what's going on inside just yet, but at least we know we have the white, we have the rounded, and we have a little bit of shadow on it. Okay, let's go to the dialog title. So the dialog title itself, this is where the font, custom font's going to come in, the shown font that we had. So it's customized, so it's font / and then we use the square brackets because it's a custom one that we just created. And is shown is the name of the font that we created. And the text size on this is kind of large, so it's going to be text, and the size is 2XL. Forgot how many rems that ends up actually being, but just large. And then margin on top to kind of push off top a little bit of 4 rem or 16 pixels. And that should be to, oh, didn't pick up our font. Oh,
We didn't do it yet.
we didn't do it yet. Okay, so this custom font, let's go back and do the custom font. So back in our custom section, we're going to be adding a font face. Now, we can add this maybe into the utilities if you consider using this in other pages as well, but we're only going to be using this in this page for this component, so I'm going to put it in the component section. But this basic CSS, specifying a font face. In the font face, you have to specify the font family name that we're going to be using. And the family name I'm going to be using is Schön, or Schön. It's German for nice, apparently. Like, doesn't have the umlauts in it. Actually, does it even have the E in German? I don't know. Anyways, that's the name of the font. And the source of the font, of course, using URL because it's in our file system. And in our file system, it's in the current directory. And the name is, oh, it doesn't actually complete it for me. That sucks. Sherna Latin Basic dot Wolf 2. It's a web offline font of the second type. Oh, you're right. Interesting. Whatever. Sona. So maybe not Shern. Anyways, I'm calling it Shern. Once you save that, you should get. Oh, no, still doesn't work. So where do we go wrong? Sherna basic dot not slash.
Oh, yeah.
It's an extension. There you go. Sorry for the confusion. Sewn, not Shern. Whatever. So disregard everything I said about the German nice and everything. It's not that. Okay, so now we got our output with the new font. And it looks snazzy. So that's how we added a font. Cool. So let's keep going. Now text input, there's multiple text inputs. Now I can just type one in, copy, and paste it into the other. But CSS and classes are kind of nice, so for mine, I'm going to make a class. And the text input was the class. And I still want to use Tailwind. So I'm going to use the apply, because I'm going to keep using Tailwind within this style section. For this one, the text input is going to be flex column, and the margin top 4 for the entire section. So the text input is a grouping of the label and the input. There's 2 of them. And so that's just the wrapper for it. Inside the wrapper, there's a text input label. Now, arguably, I could put this label directive in a new layer called units, right? Because units is usually just tag level things, but I'm going to keep it down here since it's next to text input to keep it all together. This one, I'm going to also use Tailwind to do this as well, trying to use as much as possible. The labels themselves have a padding in the y-axis of 4, or 1 rem, and a padding in the x-axis of 0.5. It could be pixels. I'm going to add in my semicolons, so they're not required just because, why not? Maybe I won't in the future, I don't know. Text input for the actual input area. I'm going to do an apply for Tailwind, and the input boxes are going to be rounded, but instead of doing the 2-pixel border radius or a 4-pixel border radius, I'm going to do a medium, which I believe is a 6-pixel border radius. Well, 1.5 rem. So for 14 pixel something.
It's not pixel perfect.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. So then from there, I'm going to put a border around the input. The border itself is going to be gray with the variant of 100, so a light gray. The padding is going to have 3 units around, 12 pixels around, and the text inside of it is going to be large, which I believe is 1.125 rem, because the default one's a little bit small. And then save that, and now we have that.
Hold up. The background blue class uses a hyphen and text input uses an underscore. Which one are you going to do?
Which one?
Hyphen, underscore.
Both.
I hate you. I'm going to use hyphens.
Underscores might be better. I don't know. It's a good point.
Well,
Maybe I'll use underscores since Tailwind uses a lot of hyphens, and I can kind of maybe visually give myself a clue that this is actually a custom class and not a. Though background blue doesn't sound tailwindy at this point. But anyway.
So we're switching underscores now? You're killing me. You're killing me.
It's like 2 places, man.
Yeah.
Alright. Good so far? Yeah, I know.
Underestimate my laziness.
I like consistency too. So I do appreciate that you brought it up. Good so far? Okay. Alright, so the text inputs are done. After the text inputs, we also have the checkbox stuff. And the checkbox stuff, there's only one of them, so I'm going to put it in line like the rest of the CSS. Okay. The checkbox itself probably doesn't need too much. Let's see, this outer one doesn't need anything. I had a class on there before to help me do addressing to the input, since it's that specific input. But since we're not doing that kind of addressing on this one, because it's not a text input, I'm just going to add a class to this input and put my Tailwind stuff inside that class. This input itself is going to have a margin on the y-axis of 8 units, and the accent, instead of the bright blue it is now, I'm going to change it to the striped blue of the 200 variant, the darker of the 2 striped blues. And then I should change that to a bit of a darker blue.
Oh, I think I got my blues backwards. Yeah, whatever.
Yeah. The label itself we're going to leave, and we're going to move on to the continue button. Continue button itself, we're going to change to have it's going to be rounded corners, also medium. It's going to be background color of the striped blue that we had before of the variant 200, the darker of the 2 variants. The text inside is going to be white. The border we're going to remove, so no border.
You're modifying the ID, not the class.
Whoops. Then I'll go back to it. And then the height of the button is 12 minutes. And yeah, thanks for pointing out. I'll change this to class. And maybe I'll add the ID back in, maybe I won't. No, we're not really using it to do anything on this one.
I think I got my colors backwards.
You want to see the colors on top?
Yeah, just for brief moment.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay. So far we have this.
Oh, that's way better. Okay.
Underneath that, we have the single sign-on link thing. For the single sign-on link thing, we're going to be adding some more styling so that we can get it properly centered and with a little bit of white space. So let's use Tailwind for that. The Tailwind on this one, I'm going to add a little bit of margin on the y-axis of 8 to the SSO, the single sign-on.
Okay.
And then we're just going to text center it to make it center. So that should add a little bit of white space around it and center the text. Okay. Okay, now for the rest of it. So I have two sections here called dialog, post, and footer. They both need probably the same amount of margin. And so I'm going to put both of these in a class up top. So scrolling up back into that section I had before, the component section. So in here, I'm going to do a dialog. Indented. Yep. Post and the footer are both going to share the same margins. And so we're going to be using Tailwind for this as well. And so we're going to apply margin on the y-axis, 8, and padding on the x-axis. Arguably, you could probably use margin as well. But anyway, that's what I had. And that should give a little bit of more white space for the stuff on the bottom. And now the shadow is a little bit easier to see as well. Okay. Other things that are on the bottom, let's see. The no account, don't have an account sign up. We can edit that directly to, give that also some breathing space. But I think instead of doing that one directly, what we'll do is we'll put a bunch of styling on the badge with the lock and the security tip. So we'll put the white space on that one instead. So for the SEC, we're going to add the white space. So margin the y-axis of 4. So that'll add a little bit of white space. What we're looking for. Yep. And then we're going to start putting this together into this little badge. Okay. And to do that, we know that it has a light gray background color, so DG gray of the 100 variant. We know it's rounded edges. Use MD to be consistent with the rest of our layout. We're going to put a little bit of margin on top of 1.5 units. Padding on the y-axis of half a unit, 0.5 units. And padding on the x-axis of 1.5 units. And then the text inside is going to be small. And if we stop there, we get most of the way there, except there's still a little bit to go. Oops. Our layout's not quite there, but we got, why did it restart again? But we got our background colors in, and so let's keep going. So text is small. We want flex to put it in the same line. Item center. Items is line items of center, so that because one thing that happened is that the lock wasn't on the same horizontal plane as the text in terms of the base of it. And so to make sure that those are on the same, we're going to center them both together. And then The text itself, we're going to say, is going to be a gray, a darker gray. And let's see, and wfit to make sure that it's not, even though it's a block level element, it doesn't take up the entire thing. I wanted to shrink to only fit the text that's in it. And then we end up with a little badge.
How do they get space around the text?
Padding?
Yeah. So between the padlock SVG and the security fit.
Oh, we're going to do that on the next one.
Oh, okay. Gonna span it or something.
So from the SVG itself, I'm going to add in a class. And in the class of the SVG, I'm going to say margin right of 0.5, which is like pixel or so. Oops, not comma 5. 0.5.
Yeah, that's. Yeah, one is right.
Okay, yeah, whatever looks good on your system. The one thing I'm kind of confused about is the fill was not added on this one. So let's add the fill, because the fill essentially affects the padlock. We can add the fill in the div, or we can add it in the SVG class. I guess we'll add in the SVG class since we're already here. Fill gray 400, the same as the text. Well, maybe I should put in the text so that they're next to each other. Whatever.
Yeah, it looks better.
So now you have the badge. It's kind of light on this one. It's darker on my regular screen. It's like a medium gray. All right. So far, now the next thing to do is these buttons. Yes and no. And so down here we have a class called helpful. Now I can create another directive up top, or I can just add something here. But I want to keep the helpful actually because I'm going to be using this later on to address the buttons, so I don't have to give each of the buttons its own name. And so I'm going to leave the helpful class there. It's not going to have a styling. It's going to be there just for addressing. But for this one, I'm going to also add in some more Tailwind with 1.5 units, and that'll at least separate it from the text above it a little bit. Okay. And then now let's work on these buttons. And so I know I can address both of those buttons by saying all the buttons underneath the class helpful. And so going back up to my CSS section, we're going to add in, there we go. So this is things that are in the helpful class. Other type of button. And I'm going to be using Tailwind this one as well. So I can apply Tailwind into that section. For these buttons, I want a little bit of shadow. So shadow medium. For box shadow, we're going to have a light border around them. The border itself is going to be light gray. So border gray 100. It's going to be rounded corners or border radius. This one I left alone. I didn't do rounded medium. But you could do rounded medium. Let's do rounded medium. Whatever. I thought the buttons might be too small for rounded, maybe turn into ovals instead, but maybe it might be alright.
They look good with them.
Okay. And then so the margin X I put at 1.5 to give a little bit of space between each other. And then on the padding on the inside, I figured on the y-axis it can use a little bit of breathing space, about 1 pixel. And on the x-axis, I put in about 1.5 units. And that's about it. So we should get something else like that, which should be not too far from, oops, what they got here. Text font is a little bit different, but whatever. So far so good. And now we have the footer. And I purposely put these into a list and unordered list so that we can also have another layer section. And I figured let's change all the unordered lists. So here we're going to be using layer unit, or sorry, not unit, base. And in the base section, in the base section, or you know what, this doesn't really make sense. Scratch that. Sorry. Keep that there though. We're going to come back to it to style the anchor tags. To bring back the color in the anchor tags. Let's just go down into the component section and just do it in the component section. It is really only for this page technically, but I'm also using a class to get to it. I'm using footer. So I'm using all the ULs and LIs in the footer class. And so all the UL LIs in the footer class, we're going to apply. The nice thing about, well, but one thing that Tailwind had done is it already removed the padding on the unordered lists. And so, which almost everybody does if they want to change the look of it. So it's kind of a nice feature. I wanted to get rid of the bullets, which it already done. So maybe that's not really needed. And then I have just the text. So the text itself is gray, variant about 500. Okay. Now, one thing that I have going on here that somehow I hadn't addressed, so maybe I did it in my code. Oh, yeah, I did it in the code. To put all these into a single line in the unordered list itself, instead of doing it up in, I guess we could have done it up in the top section, but maybe not all unordered lists need to be flattened out, but I put the flex in here to make it inline instead of box. Okay. Now we do have dots and stuff in there. No, I don't remember where I got these dots. Oh, I think I just took it right off the Stripe website. But anyways, so for the adding of the dots, I thought it'd be kind of fun to see if we can add it through Tailwind, but I couldn't find a way to do it. In addition, we got some also wanted to know that too. So it kind of fit in there. The content I couldn't find in Tailwind, so content is just content. I'm going to be adding a dot in there, but I don't know how to get that dot. So for now, I'm just going to put a star. But I copied it from their website, but it's tedious for everyone to hear to do, so I'm just going to put a star for now. But if you can find that dot that's in the middle, that's the dot that was being used. And then other than that, I did a margin, an interpoint. Thank you. 0 and 0.5. And then for this one, I just used the regular margin, though you could do apply as well with 0.25, I guess.
Can you not mix apply and regular CSS?
You can.
Oh.
Okay. And so we got the little stars in here instead of the interpunct.
Yes.
The dot.
Center.
Center dot. Yeah, kind of like a matrix. Was a matrix multiplication?
I Googled center dot.
Yeah.
And then I was able to just copy and paste it from there.
There you go. Which is exactly what I did. And so you get that nice little dot. Which I get the feeling is probably not for that. Oh, used for interword separation in ancient Latin script. Yeah, right. It's a Latin dialect. So there's the bottom. So again, one thing that I want to go back and fix is the links here are not blue anymore. They can kind of blend in with the rest of the text. And so back up where we had our base.
I missed how you got them all to blocks for single line.
Oh, down in the actual class of the UL, I added flex.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So to get all my anchor tags to actually have color again, I'm going to go into the base. So I'm going to apply it to all anchor tags because I noticed that Tailwind basically took out all the formatting for the anchor tags. So it's hard to see where the tags are. And so that's kind of a good argument for the base section. And so for that one, we're going to do an apply. I'm going to do all this on one line so I can show you that it can also be done on one line if you wanted to. But basically, all the text for the links we're going to be putting back to stripe blue of the 200 variant. I guess I should have put the semicolons in there too, just to be consistent. And so that should bring these back in. Now, one thing that maybe some of you have already noticed, maybe not, if you screw up your Tailwind section on the style section, it just barfs. Nothing gets applied. So it might, maybe it's like a clue to you, like, hey, something broke. Doesn't tell you what broke. Something broke. I don't know if the pro or con just yet. But anyway, all right. So we got that.
I spent way too much time decoding stupid CSS with this missing semicolon somewhere, and it takes forever. So I like that it barfs.
Okay, good. One other thing that we haven't really addressed is media queries. So when it's large, I would like it not to be so close to the edge, have a little bit more spacing on the edge as well as maybe a little more spacing on the top. It's something that we also see on theirs where the large ones have that big spacing. But then as you go towards mobile, you have closer to what we have now. So essentially what I had done is done mobile first design. And then we're going to add in a couple media queries so that we have a little bit more breathing space around the form when we have a full screen. And so let's see how we do that. And so media queries in Tailwind, they have essentially kind of mixed in with the rest of the stuff. And there is a section here. Forgot where exactly, so I'm going to do a find. Oh, there's also their own little quick search here. But anyways, breakpoints and media queries. Essentially, you just have to add in the size and the tailwind keywords. And so it's this size and up. So MD would be everything that is medium and up. Somewhere they had descriptions as to like where these breakpoints are. Here they are, I think, maybe. Well, I think this one also has, here they are. So 640, 780, 1024, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to go off of 640. So basically, I think a lot of mobile phones go up to like 480 or so. And so max small or SM seems to be a good breakpoint to use. So let's go and edit some of our stuff to add in those breakpoints for some of the spacing that we wanted around some of their objects. More specifically, I want a little bit more space within the dialog box to add in the space, right? And so herein lies the first problem I ran into that was kind of difficult to get around. Which one of these freaking divs is the dialog box? All I have are Tailwind directives.
This is why semantic web is good.
So, yeah, semantic web, or maybe I should have kept in the old, or maybe add in as part of my process, add in some descriptive class names that don't actually have directions, just so I know which one of these divs is the dialog box. So it's actually this one, believe it or not. That makes sense. Yeah, right. Whatever. So anything small or larger, which basically means larger than a media screen. On the Y direction, I'm going to add in padding up to 13 units, and then also for PX, I'm going to add in let's say 20, a little bit more on that side. Okay. I'm also going to add in a little bit of space on the top of stripe. It's something I noticed that they had done. So on the larger versions, they have a lot of headroom above the stripe. But then on the media version, they took away that. They took away that space at top. And so in our version, we're going to, again, try to find where the hell that top was.
What's that one over there?
It was probably this one, yeah. Yeah. Okay. And so for this one, I'm going to add in small or larger.
That's the whole box.
No, that's the top. Oh, that's the whole box?
Yeah. You want this one here, this P6, right? Because you just want the stripe SVG.
Actually, it doesn't really matter.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the display area.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you could do it one or the other. You're right. That both of them would work in our case. But essentially, in whatever area, we're going to add in padding on top of 12 units, or 48 pixels. And so, in terms of responsiveness, now that when I grow this, it should add this extra space on top and the spacing around. So you give it a little bit more breathing area. Okay. And so one of the nice things is that your media queries stay within the unit that it modifies. And so your media queries stay kind of together, so you don't have the separate media query section with, somewhere else in your CSS code. And so that I found was kind of neat. But, of course, there's a weird trade-off of trying to figure out what goes where. Other than that, I think, we've pretty much recreated what we wanted to recreate. So,
I was really liking it.
Yeah.
I thought it seemed really fast. I like not having to switch between files. I mean, I don't know that you guys are often lose focus and get sidetracked when I'm switching between files a lot, where I'm like, oh, let me do this instead of just going like we've done where we just go top to bottom.
Right.
So I really like the flow.
Yeah.
I think that it's much faster typing, like P4 instead of having to open up a new CSS selector and then type adding like 04 or something.
Right.
Seems a lot faster if you can memorize everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like it would take that long.
No.
I've memorized most of the CSS, so this is just abbreviated CSS, really.
Yeah. Like I said, it took me a couple hours, but after a couple hours, I was like, oh, okay.
Until your issue
is
trying to find the dialog box.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that being
That was maddening.
very difficult.
It feels like a maintenance nightmare.
I mean, what if we just had comments, though? Just comment your code.
Yeah.
You don't need IDs, you don't need the extra classes, just comment.
I mean, comments are good, but readable code is better.
Well, they also have components on them. I saw tab for components. I wonder if this would mesh really well with something like that. But then you would have a dialog component and then
Yeah.
a bunch of components.
And so, one of the arguments is that for things like React, Svelte, Vue, it's a great compromise or a complement to those kind of things where you don't have to use styled components or the component or the styling that's included. You can use this so that the styling stays with the component much easier than it would currently, where even with like React Native, those styled components, it's still separated.
I would be curious how it handles like interactivity. So like when you start to change things where the button color has to change depending on certain state or something.
Yeah, it's the same. It's, you go into JavaScript and you do class name dot toggle or dot add dot remove.
Does it handle like animations and stuff?
Yeah, and so there's an entire section of animations, and it also kind of did the same approach. It summarizes what it thinks are the greater breakpoints and features of each of the things. Now the keyframes, of course, you still have to do yourself. Keyframes is not really part of HTML, but once you get the keyframes in, you can do some really neat animations. And it's got some that are built in. So the ones that are built in are things like spin, ping, breathe, or pulse, I guess, bounce. So for the things that you figure is probably pretty common in terms of what you see, it's got them already built in, kind of like Bootstrap, I would say. But you can also create your own, right? Because remember we have the customized version, so it'd be animate square brackets and whatever custom animation you decide or keyframes you decide to put in. Transitions, there's also transitions, and it's got some default transitions. So like there's one. So again, getting kind of into Bootstrap territory, but it's still nice that it has a lot of these things. Some of these things, I wouldn't say a lot, but some of these things are already built in. Okay. So
I would say that on the topic of readability, yes, the HTML is a lot less readable, but I've never seen a readable CSS file.
Fair enough.
So this is combining the CSS into the HTML, so it's making the HTML a little less readable, but you don't have the mess of CSS. 1,200 line file with a million different classes.
Why are you writing 1,200 line CSS files?
I'm exaggerating a little bit, but CSS is
because we don't tree shake and we don't do technical debt is unlimited.
You can organize CSS in the same minute, right?
You can, and that's one of the things that there's been a lot of attempts to address that issue, like the whole thing of BEM. Never heard of BEM? Element something modifier. It's a way of naming things with these long names with underscores or hyphens, depending on what kind of unit they are. But the BEM methodology is one way to address the auto control
I love it.
placement of CSS.
Which is great.
Yeah.
Because you're going to spend more time reading code than you're going to spend writing code, right? And making code as easy to read as possible is the best.
And I'll put it up on here as well, so just watching the video can also see.
That's really funny. My company does a bunch of researchers who write code. Their software engineering skills are shit, but they become so sensitive to oh my god, I don't want to be seen as a bad engineer, that they're really careful about naming everything to make it as readable as possible. And their shit's amazing. I'm like, I can just go through this all day, find exactly what I want, and then PR done.
Yeah. Sass is another way of kind of addressing that problem with nested modifiers or nested CSS, which I think at some point it's in the roadmap for CSS itself. So maybe at one point we won't need Sass for anything other than maybe like loops and whatnot. But yeah, that's still that issue of auto control CSS is acknowledged. It is a problem, and there's different ways people have tried to get around it, but I'm not sure if this is a solution or not. I think is what we're getting at. Really quick, I'm going to close out my slides. I have a couple more. So one of the things that is mentioned on the website is to avoid premature abstraction. We've used apply a lot, right? When we wanted to create a custom class, and then we reapply a lot of Tailwind into that custom class. However, there's just saying don't use, because one of the problems that we get into, and we saw it in our code, like this, right? Where we have like huge amounts of utility classes. You might think, I could take all those classes, put it into a custom class, apply it, and then just call that one custom class from here, right? You're just writing CSS all over again. that's why we had to.
I feel like the thing defaults to it.
Right, it defaults into that. So they're saying be careful of the use of apply. It's the apply isn't there to make things look cleaner. The apply has a very distinct purpose to it. And if you follow this link, it'll go into a little bit more detail as to what they exactly mean by this and some ways of addressing that problem. Class amnesia is another one that I'm gonna kind of think. And class amnesia is more like, what order do I put this stuff in? Sometimes I put the padding first. Sometimes I put the colors first. Sometimes I put the text first.
Whatever you think of.
Whatever you think of at the moment, right? There's no order to it. And then the question becomes, what did I add? Did I already add the color? Just read through all the ones that you had in the past. There's a little bit of class amnesia going on. And I think they're probably through style guides or some proper training of your developers, you can say, okay, this is the order that our team is going to kind of go in to make sure that some of these instructions are in a particular order. But that's one. Another issue I noticed is just class spaghetti, just classes everywhere. And this is actually directly from their examples, from their first page, as to this is such a great tool. And the first time I read this, I was like, what is all this, right? There's just so much stuff there. Yeah, even this one on the bottom, oh my God, look at it, just the number of classes. That's 3 lines. That's 3 lines of classes. Yeah. So, I don't know, pro or con, up to you. This is another guy who made Headwind at HTML as a comedic response, and Headwind HTML is, you have Tailwind where you can take all your CSS and stick it into HTML, and now you have Headwind where you can take all your HTML and stick it in your CSS. So all you're doing is writing CSS all day.
This guy is chaotic.
Yeah. And so, anyway, obviously it's a joke. Even at the end, I think the very last question, should I use it? You should never use Tailwind in any kind of environment. But, just to make fun of that whole idea of, the idea of Tailwind shouldn't be you write no more CSS. It's supposed to be you write less CSS to make that entire process, the development process, faster. But you still have to know CSS to some degree to know what things to look for and what to apply in the situation. It doesn't change that. But anyway, so given this, there's a quick survey of all you guys out there who just sat through this. Who would actually try to use this?
I would try it with a component library.
Yeah.
I saw there's some extensions on VS Code too, because it seems like the classes, they're not really there to help you figure out what is there, what code is actually there. So there's an extension that lets you shrink it down to just ellipsis.
Yeah.
So I would
inline it.
Hide all of it. I put in hide everything, and then it's it'd be hard to debug your components if there's all these classes in the way. Where's the actual thing?
Right.
But isn't that the point of the separate file?
That's true. Personally, I love style components. That's the thing I always go to.
Yeah.
And that's what I use. But it might be fun. I can see if you're in the zone and you know the classes, you can just kind of spit it all out really quick. Just put something together.
Yeah. I think I would use this for personal projects.
Yeah.
I think, it'd be a great way to really quickly prototype a layout or a design. Just kind of see, it's kind of nice.
I think it boils down to it's meant for writing, not for reading. So it's like a write it once and then throw it away. Beautiful.
Isn't it
Perfect.
actually the opposite though? Isn't it actually made for large teams where pretty much any new employee that comes into your project can easily see all of the styles that apply on the melody?
Or they can
having
just
to navigate through the CSS file and find the specific class and find all the the more advanced CSS
Dude,
selectors.
VS Code control click.
I mean,
Like we have tools, we have standardized tools now because
it might
every
not,
IDE.
it might not give you all of the CSS that's applied on that element.
That's
You'll have
fair.
to navigate through because maybe there's a class on it, but maybe there's other things that it's inheriting from other things from parents. It's hard to see all of the styles on there.
But that's where your developer tools comes into play.
Yeah, the elements inspectors.
Yeah,
but
it just shows you
this is all in one place.
Yeah. Well, speaking to that, I also found another tool. I forgot to add a slide to it. I will go back and add the slide later. There is a browser extension for Tailwind called TailwindDX.
Developer screen.
I don't know what it stands for. But what it does is in your inspector, it adds an entire section for all the Tailwind. And so all the Tailwind comes out. So if you're talking about a junior developer, he can see all the possible Tailwind layouts, select which ones are, which ones he wants to see if it's a responsive layout, and see all the values. So arguably this is almost like WordPress layouts in your browser. Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So I don't know how I feel about this. I don't think it saves. I don't know if that's a feature. I haven't looked into it yet. It'd be really cool if if once you played with it for a while, you can actually save the thing that you just discovered. But yeah, there's this too. If you want to dig deeper into and go into Tailwind a little deeper, it's TailwindDX. Okay. Well, we're going a little bit over time, so we're gonna close it out here, and we'll bring the discussion to chicken.